Kia, this is Liz. Welcome to Dame's Blaze. If you're new to the channel, can I suggest you go watch the video, the introduction video, sorry, and start at the bottom and work your way back up to here. If you're not new to the channel, you know what's going on. Grab your Bible. While you're grabbing your Bible, I will remind you to subscribe if you have not already. Hit the notification bell if you haven't already. Give me a like at the end of the video. Give me a comment. Tell me if the videos are working for you or not. And other than that, let's get started. Now we are starting new chapter today, but I left off last time at the last line of chapter 7 because it, along with the first 11 verses of John 8, are actually not considered to be original to the gospel. Even though it does exist in over 900 manuscripts, the bulk of scholars are agreed that it shouldn't actually be here. So before we hit the text today, let me first walk you through the fascinating, to some, discipline of textual criticism. Textual criticism is a branch of literary work that has scholars looking at both the external and internal evidence to come to a conclusion, hopefully, on which reading is most likely to be original. External evidence includes things like age, distribution, and text type. Internal evidence is considering the probabilities of what a particular scribe may have done, either on purpose or accidentally, that results in the various readings we have. For one instance, why one manuscript might have "when they heard these words," another might read "these words of his." Most of the so-called mistakes by Bible critics are of that kind of nature. It's a very dense branch of study where the Bible is concerned, and most of the stuff they talk about goes over my head, I have to be honest. Needless to say then, everything I'm about to say is borrowed from greater heads than mine. I'll try not to weigh you down with too much detail, but just kind of give you an overview of the argument. The first thing to know is that we do not have any original copies of the New Testament books or letters. The authorized versions that we now have are based on the translations of thousands of Greek manuscript copies of those original documents, most of which are extremely similar, only varying in the kind of mistake I spoke about earlier. This section in John is one of the biggest under contention, along with the longer ending of Mark. And though all the scholars tend to agree that it belongs to or close to the era of the apostolic age as an event that actually happened, they are all mostly agreed that it doesn't belong in the book of John, or at least not here. They say that it disrupts the flow of Jesus' speech, and if you take a quick look at verse 12 of chapter 8, you'll see what they mean. Jesus was speaking about the water of life in chapter 7, and then in verse 12 he starts speaking about the light of the world. These two pillars would certainly work together in one speech, and the light of the world is an argument against the idea of no prophet coming out of Galilee, and a subtle reference to the prediction from Isaiah, the people who have sat in darkness have seen a great light, which would seem to indicate that Jesus has knowledge of the argument that went on at the Sanhedrin, or John did, by the time he wrote his gospel. The entire section under contention, called a pericope in scholarly circles, is missing from the oldest Greek, Syriac, Sahidic, and Sub-Academic, I hope I said that right, versions. All earlier church fathers omit it from their commentaries, and no Eastern father before the 10th century cites it at all. It is mentioned in the writings of Augustine and Jerome, which tells us it was in circulation by the mid to late 400s, although it doesn't turn up in the writing of Greek scholars until the 1200s. The earliest manuscript we have that contains it is from the 5th century AD. When it does turn up, it doesn't always turn up here in chapter 8. In a couple of manuscripts it's in other places in John, and in some it's even found in the book of Luke. So the textual critics point out that 14 of the words used in the pericope are unique to John, and that several of the other words only occur once or twice in other gospels. My thought on that is, so what? But then I'm not a textual critic. These things are important, it seems. So despite all this evidence against its originality, the scholars are agreed that it is, in fact, a biblical story, that it was most likely an event that took place during the life of Jesus, and they also say that it was most likely an orally transmitted story that eventually made its way into the text because they didn't really want to lose it. There is also some agreement that the reason many of the early church fathers, so that's Clement, Tertullian, Origen, Cyprian, and Cyril, didn't talk about it was that they felt it was slightly risky, as it seems to paint Jesus' opinion of adultery in a very dodgy light, according to them at least. In other words, there was some discussion that including it in the text could have led some to believe Jesus didn't have a problem with sexual sin, and so it was avoided as a topic of early discussion. Probably a mistake, but there you go. Many modern translations will put the whole thing in brackets and add a footnote to tell you all this stuff, which leads us to a massive question: what are we to do with it then? Well, though I'm in agreement with that the story isn't original, I'm also in agreement with those who say it still has a great deal of value and is still worth taking a deeper look at. It certainly appears to be in keeping with the way Jesus dealt with sinners. There is nothing in it that contradicts his words or actions elsewhere, and though it does bear the risk of seeming to condone sexual sin, I think that could easily be countered with the words, "Go and sin no more." We will be taking a closer look at this contentious passage because it has been kept in by the majority of translators, even if some of them put it in the margins. But I won't put as much weight on what is being said or link it to anything around it. In other words, I'll be treating it as a standalone piece and trying to avoid connecting it to John's Gospel. So here goes then. This is John 7:53 through to 8:5. And everyone went to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all of the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. Now what do you say?" So we started with everyone goes to their own home. This verse really should be the start of the next chapter, and it really doesn't read like a statement from John. It's quite blunt and short, which has not been John's habit. However, let's go with it. There's a break in the proceeding at Tabernacles. Everyone departs. Jesus, however, heads for the Mount of Olives. There's no housing on the Mount of Olives, just olive trees. This would be an indicator that Jesus has gone to pray rather than to rest or sleep. So the Mount of Olives is just opposite the hill that Jerusalem is on. It's pretty high at 826 meters. Mount Davy, which is the mountain where I live, is just over 1,000. You can probably look up a mountain in your district to give yourself a kind of idea. It's a bit of a hike. Not that he necessarily went to the top, right? Just because it says he went to the mountain doesn't mean he went all the way up to the top of the mountain. You can be on the mountain just at the foot of the mountain and still technically be on a mountain, right? Jerusalem, by the way, sits on a hill that's 785 meters high, which is why people are said to go up to Jerusalem and then go down to anywhere else. Even places to the north of Jerusalem are sometimes said to be gone down to, right? Where we would typically say I'm going up to Galilee from Jerusalem because it's north of Jerusalem. Within the biblical text, it would usually say going down to Galilee because it's lower in terms of sea level. Anyway, Jesus is up the mount all night, comes down early in the morning, heads to the temple where he sits down to teach. A small point about that: if they were reading the scrolls, they stood to show honor. When they were teaching, they sat. I had an interesting thing happen a few weeks back. My pastor was reading from the book of Psalms, and I had this real urge to stand up while he did it. I didn't do it, but I probably should have done, right? So anyway, Jesus is sitting in the temple, and then a group of scribes and Pharisees turn up, dragging a woman with them, and they set her in the middle of the group. Now, they don't throw her there, they just place her. Now, I've heard people use all sorts of volatile language around their treatment of this woman, but the text really just has them placing her there, right? So she stands there, probably with her head down, staring at the ground, and the Pharisees address themselves to Jesus. They say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act," so there's no doubting here. "Now Moses taught in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say?" So let's head back into the book of Leviticus to find out just what Moses did say on this subject. So the passage we need is right at the start of a whole laundry list of sexual sins and how they should be dealt with. We'll read the whole thing just for context but we'll concentrate on the first verse. So I'm going to Leviticus 20, which normally I would have this set up, but I didn't notice I needed to do that, so you'll have to bear with me while I flick around and find it. It helps if you're in the right book of the Bible, doesn't it? Leviticus 20, verses 10 to 21. Okay, so it's quite a big portion, so bear with me. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbour's wife, and the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man marries a woman and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burned with fire, both he and they, that there may be no wickedness among you. If a man mates with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the beast. If a woman approaches any beast and mates with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a wicked thing. And they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his guilt. If a man lies with a woman during her sickness and uncovers her nakedness, he has discovered her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, nor of your father's sister, for that would uncover his near of kin. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. You can see that it starts out with the serious sins that are dealt with by death, and it slowly trickles down to slightly lesser serious sins which do not carry a death sentence, but let's back up to our particular dilemma, that of straightforward adultery. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbour's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. The actual method of execution is not prescribed here, but commonly, if God didn't specify the method, stoning was used. Stoning was only prescribed in the case of other god worship and blasphemy, as far as I could tell. Stoning seems such a barbaric way to kill someone, doesn't it? And yet God had a purpose in that barbarism. It was a very personal method of execution. You couldn't avoid it. Everyone had to be part of it. That means that you get a full-on view of what sin causes, of the punishment that it will bring upon you and sometimes your entire family. What would that do to your thinking, do you think? Would it make you less likely to commit a sin that came with this punishment? It certainly make me think twice. And that's its purpose. It's also supposed to make you realize just how seriously God takes sin. But do you notice something about the command? It is the man who's mentioned first. It is his responsibility, and both of them are meant to be put to death. Who is missing from the tableau in front of Jesus? The man, right? The Pharisees said she was caught in the very act. There must have been a male there at the time, so where is he? Is he excused somehow? The Pharisees are already on the back foot here. They claim to be sticking to the law of Moses, which is pretty ironic, seeing as they care more for their traditions than Moses' law. Nevertheless, they say they are sticking to the law, but then again, they're not really. Otherwise, the male would have been there as well. So what are they up to then? They want to turn the tide of public opinion. Remember I told you last week that public opinion was the one card they held in the power stakes of Jerusalem. They are losing that opinion with every word out of Jesus' mouth, and so they plonk this woman into the midst of a hostile crowd to see what will happen. Jesus to them appears caught on the horns of a dilemma. If he stones her, where would that leave his strictures on mercy and grace? If he doesn't stone her, where would justice be? Either way, from the Pharisees' perspective, he is stuck. Whichever way he goes, he's going to offend someone. Now, you all know how Jesus avoids this one, but try to put that knowledge aside for a moment. Try and put yourself into the minds of those ancient Pharisees. They are godly men, or so we suppose. They believe they're on the right side of this argument. She is guilty. They are witnesses to that. They haven't brought the man, which is kind of suspicious, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say he scarpered before they could grab him. So they're feeling pretty good. They're feeling like they've got him. And so we'll all wait with bated breath to see how the King of the universe deals with this one. For the moment, consider the woman. How is she feeling? She's guilty. She knows it. She shouldn't be standing here alone, but she is. There is no one in the crowd who looks on her with favour. She will be feeling like a target because she is. Sexual sin was a massive no-no in the law. It was dealt with harshly and swiftly. Although, truth to tell, they've probably been rather slack about it since Rome took over, or even before that. The history of Israel is a trail of slackness where God's laws were concerned, and I'm assuming Jesus' day was no different. There was usually a reason for them being under foreign rule, and it usually had to do with how the Israelites were dealing with God and his laws. Still, sexual sin was just that, a sin, a big one, that required death, and so she stands condemned, as Jesus will stand condemned. He was innocent, she is not. But he came for the very type of people she represents, the downtrodden, the broken, the lost. She's been dragged from her bed of sin, pulled out of the darkness and exposed to the light. Now what? Will the light destroy her or have mercy? It would seem odd, I know, to stop the lesson at this point, but I did want to double down on the law and our understanding of it before we head into how Jesus deals with this. And I wanted you to leave without resolution so that you could put yourself into the minds of the women and the Pharisees. The Pharisees are feeling elated and vindicated. They feel like they've got Jesus in the perfect spot. What would it be like for them? To be so sure you're on the right side of the debate that there's no way you can lose this argument at this point. Have you ever been that sure of your position? I know that I have, right? As for the woman, she is surely feeling that her life is over. There will be no mercy at the hands of this rabbi. Why would she expect it? She knows the punishment for adultery, and it's not pretty. Have you been that woman at some point in your past, knowing you're a sinner, knowing your sin deserves punishment? Have you stood before the light of his grace, your sins exposed, waiting for the hammer to fall? Sit there with those emotions this week and imagine what it's like for her and them as they wait for the master to speak. Try to imagine that you don't know how he's going to deal with this. Put yourself in their place. How would you feel? What would be running through your head? That is actually where I'm going to leave you this week. I know some of you may be groaning at me, but too bad. Go away and consider what it's like to be in those positions. And I pray blessings upon you and your household, and pray I see you healthy and whole again next week, when we will discover just how Jesus does deal with this conundrum. Ka kite anō.